Welcome to this flight of the Retail Pilot. I'm Ken Pilot, former CEO and current brand advisor, investor, and board member. I'm thrilled to share with you some of the insights from retail's leaders and legends, as well as my perspective on retail today. This podcast is sponsored by the following. Want to drive more traffic and conversions on your e-commerce site? Brands that use video see 41% more traffic from search engines. And that's just the start. Meet Firework, the leader in AI-powered video commerce. Trusted by brands like L'Oreal and Unilever, Firework turns any page into an immersive, shoppable experience. From pre-recorded long-form content to short-form and everything in between. With Firework, you can easily integrate social media videos into your product pages and run pre-recorded digital showrooms with shoppable content. Plus, Firework offers AI-powered virtual assistants to personalize shopper experience and drive higher conversion. That's why I'm an investor and advisor. Learn more at firework.com. Welcome back to the Retail Pilot. My guest today is Anna Harman, co-founder and CEO of Studs, a brand launched in 2019 to transform the ear piercing and earring shopping experience for today's consumers. With nearly a decade of experience spanning operations, retail, finance, and consumer companies known for operational excellence, Anna identified a gap in the market and created Studs with Lisa Bubbers to offer safe, expert piercings in a fun, welcoming environment, paired with a wide range and selection of earrings for customizable earscaping at accessible prices. Anna began her career as an attorney after graduating from Boston University Law School. She then spent 4 years at Bridgewater Associates before moving to New York City to lead operations at Fitz, an in-home closet organizing and wardrobe editing service later acquired by Tradesy. Anna went on to serve as director at store number 8, Walmart's Retail Innovation Incubator, and most recently was interim chief customer officer at Jet Black, a personal shopping service. Anna, welcome to the Retail Pilot.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's great to see you again. We had a chance to catch up, was it last week or 2 weeks ago at the TD Cowen conference, where you took center stage with friend Oliver Chen, and I got to learn a little bit more about your background and the business. But why don't you share with us a little bit about the transformation that you made moving from law and finance to launch Studs?
Yeah, I think if you'd asked me when I was graduating for law school, and certainly if you'd asked my parents if I was going to start an ear piercing business, I think I would have been like, definitely no. So I always knew I wanted to be a lawyer. I didn't know that I wanted to practice per se. I knew I wanted to go to law school. And so I went straight from undergrad to law school. And I loved law school. Academically, really well suited to me. I loved learning how to structure an argument, and the subject matter was really appealing. I then graduated and went to go work at a firm at probably the worst time one could ever go to work at a firm, which was I was a summer associate in 2009. I interviewed on the day that Lehman collapsed, literally, September 8th, 2015. September 15th, 2008. We'll never forget that.
And they still offered you a job. That's amazing.
Offered me a job, which was amazing. But when I started, I said to them, I had really wanted to work in litigation, but I said to them, please put me where there's business because I don't want to get fired. And so they put me in the mutual fund formation group, which was about as interesting as it sounds. I loved the people that I worked with, but the work was extremely boring. And I left to go work at Bridgewater probably a year and a half or 2 years in, and spent a bunch of years at Bridgewater, which I loved, both in terms of the management philosophy and the culture, but I didn't love working in asset management. And then I went to try out a series of startups in New York, mostly in the services businesses, as you mentioned, and started working on my own idea for Studs when I was still at Jet Black.
Was there an aha moment that you had that you realized that there was this opportunity, this space in the market?
So I went to actually get another piercing totally randomly, and I went to a very premium place in New York City, and it was the summer, late summer of 2018, and they told me I would have to wait 2 hours. They didn't even take appointments at the time. And I probably would have spent, $750 or $1,000 just for one piercing. It was a very fancy jewelry store. And I left and was like, I'm not waiting 2 hours, nor do I want to spend this much. And I went to a tattoo parlor. And I got this piercing done, and I really enjoyed the piercer, and it felt healthy and safe. It was done with a needle, but the environment was really strange for me. I was 34 and in a tattoo parlor, and the jewelry was terrible, but it was still expensive. And I was sort of like, well, where do you go if you're me? That was a really weird experience. And that was how Studs, the idea, was born.
And Claire's didn't hit your radar.
It's interesting. I loved Claire's growing up. But Claire's, you grow out of Claire's. Claire's is a business that's dedicated to tweens.
Well, you have to go with your mommy.
Exactly. And so it didn't even occur to me that you would go to Claire's at my age. And they don't pierce with needles. They only pierce with piercing guns.
So I would guess, I don't know much about Bridgewater Associates, great firm. I know a bit more about store number 8 because I'm quite friendly with Katie Finnegan.
My old boss.
So how did that experience really prepare you, or what did you glean while you were there that set you up to jump in and launch a business that your parents must have been so thrilled to hear that you were doing?
Totally. So I think the thing that I really took away from that experience, really from Katie and from Mark Lori, is Mark is obsessed with this idea of unbelievable customer experience being the sort of first and foremost thing that any consumer company should try to provide. And we were doing that at Jet Black, and he is doing that now at Wonder. And I think that is really true of what we've built at Studs, which is what I believe is that if customers have amazing experiences at Studs, they will refer friends, they will come back. And if they have a terrible experience at Studs, the business is sort of sunk. It doesn't matter whether or not there's a need for the business in the market. If the experience isn't good for the customers, it doesn't matter whether or not there was a need for it, right? They just won't return and they'll default to the tattoo parlor. And so that really was impressed upon me when we were at store number 8. And I really feel like we've brought that to Studs now. And part of the way we focus on that is that great customer experience, I think, begins with great employee experience. If the people are really happy to work at Studs and we're giving them a good experience, they then provide great customer experience to the clients.
Thinking about where you must have been at the time, concepting what this could look like and considering raising money to support this endeavor. This is a fairly heavy lift in terms of a CapEx type of business. This isn't like we can try it online for a few years, see how it goes. We can open a store. This is, we need locations.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty risky. What did it look like, those first meetings with potential investors or people to put money in? Were they pushing back on wanting to get into a store business when you were probably still, I guess, maybe on the mid to end of the D2C darling curve?
Well, so that helped us. I think I won't be sort of naive about that. We raised money during a period of time where it was just easier to raise money for consumer businesses than it is today. So I think that certainly helped us. I often say that I think if Studs went out to raise money today, we wouldn't be able to raise money as a concept. I think it would be really quite difficult. I think the thing that really was in our favor, in addition to the market climate, was that people almost immediately understood the idea. And that helped a lot. And so I think it was so intrinsic to people that they were like, oh, this should exist. Why doesn't this exist? That felt like it made it simpler. Then in terms of capital intensivity, I think it's true. I think this is a highly capital intensive business. You'd have to raise money to start. It's not to say you couldn't start it as a small business. I just don't think you could expand it particularly quickly as a small business, right? And so that was part of the pitch from the beginning, which is we will have to raise a fair bit of money to get this going. However, we also are going to be very focused on the unit economics in order to be self-sufficient at a point in Studs' life, which we now are at, which is great. But we were sort of determined, I think, to not have to raise too much money to keep going.
How much money did you raise in your early round? I guess maybe was it a seed? Obviously, there was a seed round and
so we raised a little over $3 million in the first round.
And then you launched your first store when, and what were the challenges that you faced doing that?
Yeah, so we launched in the first store in late 2019, and it was so interesting because at the time, obviously not knowing what was to come in 4 months, it was amazing, right? Like lines around the block, celebrities coming to visit the studio.
And where was it?
In Nolita, in downtown Manhattan. And it was just unbelievable. You bring something, a concept to life. And what's so incredible is when you think there's going to be product market fit and then there really is, right? And then, 3.5 months later, everything grinds to an unexpected halt because of COVID. We had actually opened our second studio just 2 weeks before COVID. Yeah, in Hudson Yards. And then I remember everyone, it was like March 14th or whatever it was. And everyone was like, we're just going to go home for 2 weeks. And then it was 6 months. But the first few months were just amazing because we had proven out that this thing that we thought should exist in the world, customers agreed should exist.
It's interesting that you opened in Manhattan. If I were on your board, I would have pushed back.
Interesting.
I would have pushed back in that there's no other world like Manhattan.
Mm-hmm.
I would have said, Anna, let's find maybe cities that easily apply or we can extrapolate it to many more locations. When I launched a business during that tough time, you were talking to the Bridgewater folks, Robot Galaxy, and we purposely opened up in a couple of B malls because we knew if we could be successful there, take that show on the road. So how did you land on opening in New York?
It's interesting. I think there were sort of practical reasons, which I'll talk about, and then I would say business reasons. The practical reasons were my co-founder and I were located here. I was pregnant, right? When you open an in-person concept, I think there is no substitute for you are there every single day. I went to the store in the beginning every single day. I worked at the store. I opened and closed the store. And so I think it's almost impossible to sort of understand the business at the level of intimacy required unless you're doing that. And so at some level, it had to be in the city because I was pregnant and lived here. And so did she. So then I think there's a separate business reason, which was, I think we had the advantage, obviously, here of incredible and inherent foot traffic in any trade area, basically, that we would have opened in, right? So we were set up for better success based on that. And then I think also, we wanted to understand what an economic profile of a great store could be from a very early stage of the business so that we could then be like, okay, we have to go mirror this elsewhere. That we wanted to set the bar, and New York allowed us to set the bar.
When we talk about unit economics, and many focus on that, obsess over it, what type of economics or how much can you share with us around those economics, what you were looking for and what the financial goals were for the first store?
Yeah. I think it's funny if you looked at the original sort of fundraising model for Studs and compared it to where we are now, it's like wildly accurate, which is really interesting.
Wow.
And that's both great and we're executing well. And it's also, I think, not an accident in the sense that everything about the pricing, the size of the studios we choose, how much we spend to build them was designed to produce highly, highly profitable stores with very high sales per square foot. So we're talking about sales per square foot in the thousands based on our size of units, which typically range from 700 to 1,500 or 2,000 square feet. EBITDA margins that are in the high 30s at a per studio level. Each studio is profitable in the first month.
Wow.
We're paying back the studios extremely quickly. And so
that, just to put a pin in that for a second, 30% four-wall profit is like, those are crazy numbers.
Yeah.
So let's pause and let's, are we raising another round right now?
No, because we don't need to, which is great.
Obviously.
Yes. But whenever people look at the numbers, they're like, wow, right?
Just to, by comparison, a lot of times pro formas will typically be set by retailers with 20% being the target or objective. And yet many are pretty happy with 15% four-wall profit. So kudos to you that you're 2x that in your locations. That's amazing.
Yeah. Again, I think it was both by design in the sense that that's how the pricing is structured, et cetera. And then I think the brand is a big part of that. And my co-founder was really responsible for that, which is the way that people experience the studios is a combination of the design of them plus the hospitality experience that they have in them. And they want to come and tell their friends and come back. And so we have a lot of very high foot traffic at the studios, which helps us achieve an amount of throughput that allows us to produce those numbers.
So when you look at the landscape out there today, how has it changed? Who are the competitors? Who do you view as competitors? What are the options for someone to get an earpiece or get earscaped, if you will?
The main competitor that the customer tells us is the tattoo parlor. And there are 20,000 independent tattoo parlors in the US. So the customer, when we do surveying and we ask, where else would you go? Far and away, the alternative to Studs is the tattoo parlor in their view, right? And I think that's because any of the other players that are out there, call it the legacy brands or even newer brands, either only pierce with guns, right? And the customer doesn't want a gun piercing, or their marketing is really targeted at a younger audience than Studs is. And Studs' average age is a late 20-year-old, early 30-year-old. And we're really talking about second piercings and beyond. And so we're just not in the business of piercing, literally not in the business of piercing babies. We don't pierce under age 13. And so I think when you think about who that customer really is, they're looking for an elevated experience that is appropriate for their age.
So that really separates you from a Rowan who's been growing very quickly. There's one on my block, and I had Louisa Schneider on the podcast a while ago, but definitely catering to like that first piercing with nurses on hand to provide those gentle, loving hands.
Totally. And I think, my overall view is a rising tide floats all boats. So more people doing piercings and bringing that to the world is positive, I think, for the trend, right? And then I just think, secondly, even when we started, we pierced 8 and up. And what we found was we really don't want to be in the first piercings business. And that doesn't mean that there aren't 25-year-olds that come to us that have never had their ears pierced. Of course there are. It's more that if our median customer age is late 20s, early 30s, and they're there with an 8-year-old, or in the Rowan case, with a 3-year-old or a 6-month-old, right? The 27-year-old is sort of like, what am I doing here, right? Because the brand, I think, for Studs is meant for an older, more mature customer, and everything about our positioning is dedicated to that. And so I think that's the reason that the customer tells us we would go to the tattoo parlor if not for Studs.
Makes perfect sense. We used to have that challenge with Gap, Baby Gap combo stores where we had to really start to pull Baby Gap out because kids didn't want to be with babies in the store. And
exactly.
And then even you take that to Gap, didn't want kids in their store. So it was just like, find who your customer is and cater to them very well, going back to probably some of your takeaways at store number 8 around the customer experience. You have about over 30 stores right now?
Yeah, we're about to open in, I guess, a month. We'll open our 34th store.
And the profile of store that you look for, is it city, strip center, inside the city? Where do you want to be?
I would say we have 3 current profiles. First is high street, major US city. So that's where the story of our New York stores. The second is very high-end lifestyle center, indoor or outdoor. We have tons of those now as well, and have done a lot of partnerships with certain landlords, Related and Westfield, in order to open a lot of those. And then the third has been interests in secondary cities or college towns. So it was in Madison, Wisconsin. We have a store in New Orleans. And I think, that set of stores has been helpful for us to understand both how many stores Studs can get to through time, but also what are the real requirements for a successful store.
How does online work and what does it mean to your business?
It's interesting. It's about 85% of the revenue comes from the stores, about 15% comes from e-com. We spent a bunch of time on e-com, obviously, during COVID because we didn't have anything else to spend time on. It is a complementary business to retail in the sense that we acquire customers via it and then they go get pierced, and vice versa, that we acquire piercing customers who then buy online. And so I like it for that purpose. Would we have ever started Studs, to your point before, as like an online only business? No. And we often joke that we would never have launched like earrings.com and that we don't think earrings.com is a particularly good business, right? And I think that's true. Like, I think at some level, people, especially in the D2C era, want to think that online channels are infinite. And I don't personally believe that, both due to the changes and realities of advertising costs and deliverability and all those things, but also because I think product is really just a dime a dozen now. It has become so easy to produce product that unless it's a race to the bottom on price, you're very unlikely to have a great e-com business these days.
Let's talk a little bit more about product. We spoke briefly before we jumped on the podcast about sourcing, some China, some Thailand. So obvious tariff challenges with either, but more importantly, who leads the creative? Where are you finding your ideas?
For product, our SVP of merch, who was at Shop Op and opening ceremony for a very long time and has been with Studs since almost the very beginning, and is really the engine and brains behind product innovation. And I think our main place that we're spending time on from an innovation perspective is how do we create amazing piercing jewelry and also piercing adjacent jewelry, if that makes sense, jewelry for earscaping. Because what our customer really wants from studs is jewelry that you can wear all up and down the ear, right? And I think she's done an incredible job iterating on and ideating in that type of jewelry versus in what we call, the market calls statement earrings and we call first lobe earrings, right? I think first lobe earrings are not really what the customer wants from studs.
Break down the price of an experience at Studs.
You start with service pricing, which is separated out from unit pricing. You obviously can't get a piercing without buying a piece of piercing jewelry. And so our titanium piercing jewelry starts at $35 and 14K starts at $80. And from a piercing services perspective, we start at $35 and go up from there. So the least expensive one piercing you could get at Studs would be $70, $35 plus $35.
And outside of earrings, what are the accessory jewelry items that you're selling today?
We only sell earrings.
Only.
And we are not interested in selling other pieces of jewelry. That is not the direction that Studs will head in.
Interesting. So what's within, going back to product again, what's driving the business today? What's she buying in the store, or what's he buying in the store?
Yeah, it's interesting. I go back to, I think the customer thinks of Studs first and foremost as a piercing brand. And so when they're coming in, they're thinking about, I'm here for a piercing. I'm here to change a piercing. I'm here to put new jewelry into a piercing versus like they might think of Majuri as a jewelry brand, right? I think very few customers think of Studs as a jewelry brand per se.
Interesting. We chatted briefly while we were at the TD Cowen conference about lab diamonds. Share with us a bit more about what's happening with lab. First of all, what a lab diamond is and what's happening with that category.
So a lab diamond is just what it sounds like. It is a diamond that is grown versus mined for in a mine, and it is grown under an incredibly intense pressure, right? And so basically, it is a scientific process to create a mineral versus an earthly process to create a mineral. We only sell lab-grown gemstones at Studs for two reasons. One, they're more cost effective for the customer, and our customer would like that pricing. And then secondly, we were very reluctant to get into the certification process around mined stones and felt that we couldn't be authentic with our customers around, even with all of the certificates, et cetera, about were these really produced or retrieved under ethical circumstances.
If you were to compare the price of a lab stone to a mined stone, what's the price difference on something that's on an equivalent size color?
I would say it's interesting because one of the things that's happening is that, and this is not good, I think, for the mined diamond market, is that lab-grown diamonds are also sort of a race to the bottom in pricing. And so the prices are getting cheaper and cheaper as the manufacturing processes actually get more efficient. So if you looked at the price of a lab-grown diamond 10 or 15 years ago, when the concept was first unveiled, they are much more expensive than they even are today. So right now, the price is probably a quarter or a fifth a mined gemstone for the same size and carat, et cetera. But I think it could be even lower than that.
So if you were looking for, I don't know, a 1 carat stud earring, or tell us what like the most popular item in the lab category is right now.
Yeah, so we are, in general, all of our pieces are very small. And so we're not carrying things that are like 1 carat, we're carrying things that are a tenth of a carat. So pricing wise, pieces like that at Studs are around $200. But it's interesting, like even right now, I'm Googling for the purposes of this. I'm curious just to price compare. A 1 carat lab grown diamond I see ranging in price anywhere from $250 to $1,600, right? And so that's what I mean by the pricing is just getting pushed farther and farther down.
And what would a mined of 1 carat stone be?
Let's look. I'll tell you right now. It looks like, wow. I mean, obviously, again, it depends on clarity and all those things. It looks like the lowest is about $4,700 and the most expensive is $12,000, right?
So a bit of a spread.
Yeah, so a big spread. And again, it goes back to, I think, the manufacturing processes are getting more and more efficient. I think it's going to be interesting to understand whether the mined industry can really persist.
Well, all that being said, have you seen the penetration of diamonds or stones growing as a percent to total based on the affordability of it?
Yeah, I think the thing that's interesting is at inception, not of studs, but when lab-grown diamonds, I think, first came to the market, I don't know if you ever were familiar with this product called moissanite. Moissanite was like a CZ alternative that came to be probably in the mid-90s. And for a while, moissanite was like the fancier CZ, but not a diamond, right? But it was a diamond alternative. In some ways, it's equivalent today where now people are using lab-grown white sapphires as alternative to lab-grown diamonds. But I think there was this feeling when lab-grown diamonds came out in the beginning. I remember even feeling like that as a customer, independent of studs. Sort of being like, like there was it felt like a CZ. It felt fake.
Well, you would think, and I think I said that to you when we were talking about it, they're fake. They're not fake. These are real diamonds. They're just grown under controlled conditions.
Totally. And so I think the sort of initial, well, that's not real reaction is now totally gone.
That stigma is gone.
The stigma is totally gone. Not only because I think of people saying, I want to have clarity about where my diamond came from, but also I think because literally, chemically, the product is the same. So the idea that you're like, it's not the same thing, it literally is the same thing.
I definitely grew up during the wrong time because had I gotten engaged.
Exactly, though.
I would have been leaning into that lab stone, that lab diamond. It would have been a 4 carat, not a 2. I would have been a 0, not a 0.
And your then partner would have been thrilled because they would have gotten this big, giant rock.
My then partner is reminding me that she can still get a giant rock now.
Yes. In fact, she can.
Yeah. We'll talk about that later. Any collaborations, or how do you deal with the whole social media space and getting the brand out there?
Yeah, we've done a lot of different collabs over the past few years. We've been very focused in, I would say, the past 18 months on collaborations with food brands because we think there's a lot of inherent virality in food, especially given TikTok's continued rise. I think we are interested from a collaboration perspective in ones where it feels to us like we are accessing new audiences via the collaboration. So we're not speaking to the same audience that we already have. And so that's how we're thinking about picking partners. And look, people come inbound to us every day because they think they see both that we do a lot of them and that we execute them really well. And so we also have a lot of interest, which is exciting. We get to be choosy.
And now a quick word from our sponsor. Looking for a 3PL that's truly next level? Cart.com is a 3PL on steroids with nationwide distribution centers and the most advanced AI-driven software solutions from WMS and OMS to TMS, all designed to streamline your entire delivery process. With Cart.com, you get a fully integrated commerce platform that unifies your operations, data, and customer experience all in one place. Their platform combines physical distribution with cutting-edge AI, empowering retailers to scale faster and more efficiently. Whether you're D2C, B2B, or omni-channel, Cart.com connects your tech stack, simplifies your logistics, and powers your growth from click to customer, enabling distribution for Janie and Jack, Portland Leather Goods, Tom's, and many more. Cart.com. Today's podcast is also brought to you by Simulate. Search has changed. Today's shoppers don't type keywords, they ask questions, full sentences, 35 words on average. Legacy search engines can't keep up, but Simulate can. Simulate's the first AI-native commerce platform powered by Commerce GPT, built to understand intent, not just match words. That means smarter results, fewer dead ends, and higher conversions automatically. Visit Simulate AI. That's with a C, Simulate with a C, to see how context-aware AI is reshaping commerce in-store and online. I want to talk a little bit about leadership and team building, both of which you've had to do a great deal of over the past few years. When building your team, what qualities did you look for, or do you continue to look for in candidates?
So based on my Bridgewater experience, Studs culturally takes some elements of Bridgewater. And so we're very transparent and very feedback oriented. And so people on the Studs team will like being at Studs if they are attracted to environments that are like that, highly direct and very focused on improvement. Like, I believe we can always raise the bar. I was recently, working with somebody and they were looking over financial, et cetera, materials about our business. And they were like, you're running this business like it's $1 billion business, like with the level of sophistication of $1 billion business. And I was like, I agree, but that is the point, right? Like the level of sort of operational rigor that I want out of the team is higher. It's sort of inconsistent in a way, I think, with the business's size, if that makes sense. And so I think candidates who like it here are ones that respond to those things culturally, but also are ones who respond to the idea of, I want to make my work better every day.
Do you have a go-to interview question?
It's funny. I don't. And one of the things that I sort of lament about interviewing at Studs is at Bridgewater at the time when I was there, we had a very, I would call it like intense interview process, one of which there were typically 3 interviews that you went through, but one of which was what we called a discussion group. And you would be in a group setting with other candidates and moderators where we would talk about a topic that was like a hot button topic in the world at the moment, where reasonable people could be on either side of the issue, right? And we would debate as a group, and you would see how people showed up to that debate. And I miss that interview process and style tremendously. Now, you can't implement something like that at Studs, both based on the fact that we're the type of brand we are and the type of candidates we get. Like, it just wouldn't make sense. But that was, I would say, the most systematically revealing way to interview, right? Which is, can somebody debate? Can they maintain a logical thread? Do they get emotionally hijacked by questions that are hot button issues that they care about a lot? I loved that process. I miss it a lot.
It's so interesting. So were you thrown into a room with 2 or 3 other people and then said, here's the topic, let's go?
Talk about the death penalty. Go.
Wow. I mean, God, I could see today, boy, I'd be done in like a minute. I'd probably lose my cool, blow up, and then I'd have to walk out. And they would look to that.
And I don't know if they still do it, right? Because of that very issue, which I think some of these issues have become too hot buttons.
Too hot. Exactly. Right. Very interesting.
But process-wise, I loved it. I miss it. I miss that interview process a lot.
What do you consider your leadership strengths and talents?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I don't know how much you ever read. A thing came out about a year ago that, Paul Graham at Y Combinator wrote that he had done sort of in collaboration with Brian Chesky from Airbnb about founder mode. And the whole premise of it, or at least my takeaway of the premise of it, is that there are ways that founders can interact with the businesses that they started that are very different than the ways that any executive will interact with the business that they didn't start. And I really believe that to be true. And so I think that one of the things that's great about me at Studs is that I am really in it. And one of the things that's terrible, I think, about me at Studs is that I'm really in it, right? And Brian described in one interview he did the idea of being in founder mode. Your relationship to your company is that they're like the company is your biological child. And I'm like, that is exactly what it feels like, right? And you know everything about your biological child because you know where every body is buried and what every stone unturned would be. You remember when your kid took their first steps and how difficult that was. And you are the only person that sort of possesses all of that information. And your ability to manage the company with it is really different than somebody who came in as a hired gun to work there. And that doesn't mean that people that have never been founders can't have incredible ownership mentality. I think many can, but I don't think that is necessarily true of everyone. And I think that often when people think about how I'm working with Studs, they forget that like, it's not just a company I work at, it's my company.
How many people do you have?
We have about 300 now, including the field employees.
Wow. Okay. Fair. Field takes up a few people.
Yep.
Would you say you manage in place or do you manage by wandering?
Oh, that's interesting. Both. It's funny when you talk about wandering. I don't do this, but Ray at Bridgewater did this a lot. We would be at meetings at Bridgewater and Ray would be wandering. And Ray would literally poke his head into a meeting and be like, what's going on in here? Right? And it's a really effective tactic. I don't really do it. I sometimes am tempted, but I don't really do it. But it was a really effective tactic because I think it allowed him to taste the soup. He was tasting the soup constantly.
Yeah, it's funny. When I was at Gap, Mickey would definitely manage my wandering. You never knew when there was a Mickey meeting waiting to happen in your office.
Yep.
So you always had to be ready, always had to know your numbers, be on
Yep.
top of your business. It kind of kept everyone on their toes.
Yep.
That was a good lesson learned there. How would your team describe you as a leader?
I think incredibly intense. I have a very high bar. I think wildly detail-oriented. Some would say too detail-oriented, very in the weeds of what is going on. And I think the positive of that, going back to the founder mode and biological child analogy, is that if I want things done a certain way, or if I have instincts about how we should change how we're doing something, I'm often right? The negative about that is that that's annoying.
Yeah. Well, going back to your original business plan, which seems to be spot on, as you said, based on where the business is today, it's clear that you've had a lot of success with studs. Congratulations.
Thank you.
But there must have been one or two things that didn't go as planned, or things that were a huge disappointment that you learned from and rolled on. What might those be?
I think we've always thought of the brand as really a Gen Z brand, and a lot of the brand positioning very early on read, I think, very Gen Z. And I think we were surprised to find that the customer's a little older than that. So I think that's one of the things. Studs is now becoming, I would call it a more elevated young millennial brand than it is a Gen Z brand.
I've heard that you have a 92-year-old model somewhere that wants one of your stores.
We had a 92-year-old get pierced in New Orleans a month ago. She's on the Instagram if you want to see her. So I think that was a surprise. And then I think the second thing is, I think, we've really believed that there would be incredible demand for higher end jewelry from this slightly older customer. And what we found is that there's some demand, but it's not as significant as we thought. I think we thought we could go up more in price than we probably can.
Got it. Cool. I want to wrap up with rapid fire.
Great.
Here we go. When not working, what occupies your time?
Working out, spending time with my kids. I have 2 boys, a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. So that occupies a lot of my time. And I love to cook.
That leads me to my next question. Favorite hobby?
Probably I would say cooking. But I also think everything that sort of surrounds cooking. And what I mean by that is visiting restaurants. I love watching cooking related content. And so cooking plus all of the things that come with it.
All right. Well, that breeds 2 additional questions. Your best dish and favorite restaurant?
Best dish is either risotto or roast chicken. I've been making both since I was probably in my teens, and really love to make both. Roast chicken is more, I would say, signature, if you asked about my personal brand. And favorite restaurant, I actually went just this week to a new restaurant on the Upper East Side that's owned by the guys that own Sushi Na's called Chez Fifi, and Chez Fifi is great.
Very good. I would agree with you 100%. Best place you've ever vacationed?
Just got back from San Sebastian to the food-related hobby. Got back from San Sebastian and Menorca, and it was a really incredible trip.
Favorite streamed show?
Again, I feel like I'm on a tear now. I'm maybe The Bear. I would probably say Succession. I love Succession.
Who would you most like to meet?
It's interesting when you sent this question originally, I was thinking dead or alive. And so I'll start dead.
Okay.
Steve Jobs, for sure. And then alive, it's so interesting, which this sort of is very at odds at some level with Steve Jobs. I think Taylor Swift.
I like that combination.
Yeah.
Final question. How many piercings do you have?
9, and probably 19 to go. 9 so far.
And with that, we'll end this flight of the Retail Pilot. Anna, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's flight of the Retail Pilot. And please give us a review on your favorite podcast platform.